1, 2, check 1, 2. Check, 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 check. Welcome to the Stadium Pulse, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tegan Randolph, your host for all things college football. I appreciate every single one of you guys for tuning into today's show on an unorthodox schedule. We traditionally try to do this every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday, but because of the college football playoff, because of everything that is going on in college football, there's no better time than to just talk about it right now. We have so much to talk about. Where do we really begin? We could talk about Ohio State losing to Miami, which we will talk about. We could talk about the fact that Texas Tech left an offense at the checkout line. They bought a top 5 defense. They forgot to get an offense. We will talk about every college football playoff game here today, but we'll also talk about the transfer portal. What is going on? Who's hopped into the portal? Who is the impact players? Who are some of the guys that I think could make a huge difference into the landscape of 2026? Welcome to the Stadium Pulse. Thank you guys so much. This is all powered by Kretschmann Media. We've had extensive growth in late 2025. 2026 is going to be incredible. It's going to be an incredible time. And the only thing I'm ever going to ask you during this show, it could be a like, it could be a share. All of that is appreciated. And we see it all the time that when we actually ask, we see an uptick, is just click subscribe. No credit or debit information. I'm not trying to steal your information. The only thing that I'm asking for is your time, which is invaluable. But just clicking that button gives you more college football content. And that's all we do around here. Let's take a sip before we dive on in today. If you're a longtime viewer of the show, I came prepared. Got some good old chapstick ready to go. Down goes the defending champions to the Miami Hurricanes. Wow. This was not expected. I don't think anyone was going into this game saying, yeah, Miami's guaranteed to win. And I think unless you had a voodoo witchcraft, maybe a little crystal ball that you were working with, not a lot of people were picking Miami to actually win in the spot outside of everyone in Coral Gables or a fan of Miami football. Miami wins 24-14. They get out to a 14-0 lead very early. A jumped screen pass by Keontae Scott, who continues to just make play after play. He also got the fumble against Marcel Reed in the first round. I almost feel like him and as well as Akeem Mesidor are the unsung heroes of this Miami defense. Obviously, Ruben Bain's going to get a ton of love, and rightfully so. Ruben Bain has been ridiculous in this college football playoff run, but Mesidor and Keontae Scott are making incredible plays. This is a collective effort from this defense to not only shut down any kind of semblance of a rushing attack for Ohio State, but to be honest, Ohio State was sputtering on offense so much that they allowed that 14-point lead to happen. They really didn't have the freedom to start running the football and be more of a balanced offense. What's crazy about this game, in retrospect, as we look back on this game, is truly two pieces. Number one, if you had told me Malachi Toney, collectively, rushing, passing, receiving, was to only have 20 yards, I would have thought Ohio State shut him down, which they did, but also win the game by 30-plus points. And then you flip it to the other side, and if you tell me truly that Jeremiah Smith was going to have 150-plus yards and the Malachi Toney was only going to have 20, I would have thought Ohio State won by 50. And that's not the case. That's what's so impressive about this win for Miami is truly rooted in the fact that their star weapon on the wide receiver room, and frankly, the entire offense, their offensive identity for the majority of this season has been Malachi Toney in every which way on a true freshman's shoulders. And he didn't play a great game because none of us expected him to. When you're facing Arvell Reese, Sonny Styles, Caleb Downs, all these different weapons on the defensive side of the ball that can shut down the best of them, and yet you still win. That's impressive. That's remarkable. And I have given a lot of flack to Mario Cristobal in the way that he coaches in game. He was always able to get talent into the building. He was always able to build a good semblance of a culture, but it never really got reflected onto the football field. This physical, hard-nosed, resilient team. It always seemed like every time that Miami got punched in the mouth, they would cower and roll over. This is not the same Miami team, and it's really remarkable. Like we've talked about, Ruben Bain and Mesidor just wreaked havoc on Julian Sand, and we really got to see Ohio State in a different light. Because for the majority of this season, they were working off of the merit that they were the defending champs, and there was a understanding that even though their schedule was a little bit lighter, a lot of people assumed that they could turn the switch, that they can flip it to another level, truly from the fact of what we saw last year where they got popped in the mouth by Michigan and then they go on that run. And there was a big collective merit built from that. Then they had a I would say poor performance offensively against Texas to start the year, but it was Texas, the number one team going into the season. Then offensively, they didn't have a great performance against Indiana in the Big 12 or Big 10 championship. Didn't score a lot of points there. You blamed a little bit on Brian Hartline, distractions, all these different things. But each time that you faced a top 20 defense, the only times that you face against a top 20 defense in the regular season and partially the postseason with the Big 10 championship, your offense completely crumbled. We're talking about the same Julian Sand that Ohio State fans believed for the majority of this season should have been in the Heisman conversation. We're talking about an offense that has Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, two future top 10 picks, pretty safe to say. You have Bo Jackson, a true freshman running back, a very dynamic running back, and an offensive line that is very talented, and of course, Julian Sand. So you have all these different pieces. We could even throw in Max Clare in there, transfer tight end. All these different pieces look great against the not good defenses, the not top 20 defenses. And it always felt throughout the entire regular season that Ohio State was never really putting the gas down, but it always felt like there was a lot of gas left in the tank, meat left on the bone. And maybe there was this understanding that we could see them turn it up in the latter part of the season, that they could really ramp up, that they've understood how long the college football season is at this point, and that they're going to ramp up to it. But they never got to that. And I think partially because their offensive line is just not good enough. And I don't know if there's an offensive line on the face of the planet that was going to be able to hold on to Ruben Bain and Mesidor. That defensive line just earned themselves a ton of money. They were already going to make a ton of money to the NFL. They've ramped up a couple $1 million, maybe even an entire zero added to that paycheck for how good they played. 5 sacks, 7 tackles for loss. And it's so impressive with Miami. And the last note I want to end this on, because Miami's going to go on. They're going to go play Ole Miss, and we'll talk about that game as well. This Miami team is showing things that previous iterations of Mario Cristobal teams has never shown. And that is what's making them so dangerous. They're not winning solely because of Carson Beck. They're not winning solely because of Mark Fletcher, although you can make the argument last game they did. They're not winning just because it's Malachi Toney going for 150 yards in every which way possible. They're finding the little bits and pieces and making the winning plays throughout a football game. And that is not something we could have said in previous years. That is not something we could have said with Miami teams over the past 15, 20 years. That's what's making them so impressive. And that's what makes the U truly feel like they come back. And I'll just say this. As we take a step back into the overall picture of the 2025 season, you thought Miami was able to bring in talent because of NIL. What's going to happen when they have actual success that backs it? That's what's going to be scary. But Ohio State, we will have a conversation about the buys and whether or not they're valuable. I think I'll save that for the offseason, but down goes the defending champs to the Miami Hurricanes. What a win. What a win. For audio listeners, pardon me, I had to take a little sip and pop the neck. So pardon me for this. There you go. Let's get the shoulders loose. It's an early morning. Good morning. Hope you enjoy your coffee. I'm not proud that I'm doing energy drinks right now. Oregon rolls through the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Lubbock, Texas bought themselves a top 5 defense, but left an offense at the checkout. Truly 23-0. A donut. Not a single point was scored for the Red Raiders. And frankly, the number one thing I wrote right here, could have been much worse. It could have been much, much worse. There was plays here and there where Oregon would get into the opponent's territory and it was a botched snap, or maybe it was a 4th down and Dante Moore just straight up missed Kenyon Sadiq on a post route. There was so much meat left on the bone for Oregon, and we'll talk about that perspective on when they go face, who is it, Indiana, and the fact that they didn't even play their best version of themselves, and specifically the offensive side of the ball, and they still won 23-0. Texas Tech's defense is legit. That's a huge takeaway in this game. And that was something that I said going into this game, was Texas Tech's defense was always going to be legit. The problem being, and what not a lot of people are talking about, is how are they going to get points on the board? You will see the statistic that everyone talked about, even on the broadcast, time and time again. Oregon was the number 1 explosive scoring team in the entire country. Explosive by being like 20 plus yards or more. And Texas Tech was 2. Scalability is so important in context when talking about those statistics. Texas Tech's offense with Baron Morton very clearly was the worst offense going into this round of the college football playoff. Baron Morton, God bless him. He's a Texas Tech kid through and through. Great story. Him winning the Big 12 championship in the fashion that they did. It's all a great story. And I even said this going into this weekend. This was a successful year for Texas Tech. They accomplished what they wanted to do. Internally and in that building, more than likely, that's not what they would say, where they wanted to more than likely go win a national championship. But I would say for this year and the investment, this was a successful year for Texas Tech. You have to elevate at the offensive side of the ball, and more specifically at the quarterback position. Baron Morton's just not good enough to scale up to this talent level against an Oregon team and a front 7 that was wrecking havoc. I mean, I don't know how, if you're a Texas Tech defender, how you're supposed to feel successful after, fighting tooth and nail an entire drive trying to stop Dante Moore, get to the backfield, stop Whittington, stop all the wide receivers, Kenyon Sadiq and the tight ends and Johnson, and then you turn around and it's a 3-and-out. The offense was dead on arrival. The offense had no life to it. And when you continue to keep this Texas Tech defense on the football field, I mean, you are bound to score points sooner or later, and it took a late touchdown to even get it to 23. If Texas Tech had any semblance of an offense, maybe even like a top 50 performance, just some sort of consistency, whether it's just like, even if they had an Iowa level offense where you can run the football, I think they have a very good chance to win this game. And that was even with my third point being Dante Moore, I thought was surgical. Now, the stat line is not going to tell you that because he had no touchdowns, 1 interception, but going 26 of 33, it's those 26 completions that really stood out to me. Now, I understand people will go back to what I just talked about, the turnover. You will talk about the Kenyon Sadiq miss, and there were some moments that wasn't great. That pick was not great. But those 26 completions, there was NFL throws everywhere. And that was him getting pressured. That was him with David Bailey in his face, Romello Height, and all these guys really creating pressure. They found success. Like I mentioned, this Texas Tech defense is legit. I think a fair question as we even take a step back is to say, what is that Texas Tech defense going to look like in 2026? Because they're going to lose a ton of pieces to the NFL draft. And something I don't think a lot of people are talking about, can we really feel confident? Do we really feel within our soul that Texas Tech is just going to be able to dive right back into the transfer portal and all of a sudden have another elite team? Maybe that's possible in the Big 12, maybe. But we see the volatility with the Florida States in the world. We see the volatility with the Colorados of the world on these heavily reliant on the portal. Now, I will say this, they've done so much better than both of those schools in high school recruiting. But the guys that they're bringing in are going to be true freshmen. It is imperative that they hit on these transfer portal additions in 2026, because then by the 2027 season, we're going to be looking at all those high school recruits, those high-end guys, those 5-stars that Texas Tech is now magically getting with some money. You have to let them develop, because if you're throwing a ton of true freshmen out there, maybe you crash and burn in the transfer portal, then you get burned by the same thing that got you the success that originally started the downhill train of all the money that's being invested into Texas Tech. And for Oregon, because I think we've closed the chapter on Texas Tech at this point, this is the preview that I think I was the most on the money on. Oregon, I still feel like, has the best football in front of them, with 2 potential games left, one against Indiana and then the national championship. This game could have been so much worse. There was so much meat left on the bone. And I'm not saying that it's going to happen. They could easily just get smacked around by Indiana, who played incredibly well against Alabama. But there's still the upside. I don't know what Oregon's ceiling is. They continue to get a little bit more healthy. The offense just needs one really good performance with a high-level quarterback, 2 great tight ends, and they were facing off against one of the best defenses in the entire country. And that defense, I think, is playing as advertised. You had a true freshman cornerback go get 2 picks and a forced fumble recovery, and you have all these different performances that makes me feel pretty confident that truly this Oregon-Indiana matchup is going to be the national championship. Very similar to what I felt with like Texas and Ohio State, I think last year. That matchup in the semifinals, I really do believe is going to be the national championship, but we'll talk about that when we get a little bit closer to that game. Let's talk about Indiana and Alabama. Need some chapstick. Pardon me, everyone. Indiana rolls the Tide. That's the only way we could describe this game. 38-3. Let that sink in for a second. The Indiana Hoosiers beat the Alabama Crimson Tide 38-3. Fernando Mendoza, the Heisman winner, had more touchdowns than he did incompletions. They were 9 of 14 on third down. They were 3 for 3 on the red zone. They had 215 rushing yards and 192 passing yards. There was not a single moment in this game where you felt like, oh yeah, Indiana's putting their foot all the way down. They're putting pedal to the metal. There was not a single moment that you felt like Indiana really felt like they were in jeopardy. Maybe outside of the first play, which I believe was a Fernando Mendoza sack, because Alabama started to send more than you could block. And yeah, they were able to get to Fernando Mendoza at times, but guess what? It didn't matter. It frankly did not matter. This game was ridiculous to watch. It was a masterclass from Kurt Cignetti. It was a masterclass from the Indiana team. This is exactly what we talked about. If Indiana plays the way that they want to play, in the formula and the identity that they've played all season, they will win every single game. Not to the same, I guess, margin, but if they play sound football, it's a really tough team to beat. And it's not hard to say that because no one has beaten them. No one has been able to do it. Penn State was able to have a closer margin of victory. Iowa was able to have a closer margin of victory than this Alabama team that was healthier than ever, than this Alabama team that had the upside and the ceiling of going into Athens, Georgia, in beating Georgia. It did not matter. We saw Ty Simpson get banged up in this game. Ty Simpson goes out. Austin Mack comes in, has a couple of moments. It's really hard to put into words how great of a story Indiana is. Now, was I someone who was pushing back on Indiana in the college football playoff last year with Curtis Rourke and that team? Yes, I was. I will always admit that. But this is 2025. Well, now 2026. And this Indiana team is inching closer and closer to like all-time great category. It is so hard to beat this team when you have two running backs as dynamic as Black and Hemby. Then you throw in Fernando Mendoza, who is an absolute surgeon from the short area of the field. And I think he's the best quarterback of throwing outside the numbers in the entire country. Wide receivers and Surratt and Omar Cooper, who are very dynamic, and then one of the fastest players in the entire country coming out of the slot. Then you have a defense that doesn't have the size or the overwhelming talent as a 2024 Ohio State or the Georgia teams that follow them. But we're looking at an Indiana team that plays some of the most sound football, and they will not shoot themselves in the foot. And frankly, all the things that you hear Curt Cignetti talk about in his pressers and the coach speak of, we have to execute, we have to play our style, is all true. That is one of the things that used to drive me up a wall whenever people would get on Jimbo Fisher. I'm about to pull Jimbo Fisher out of the hat. When people would talk about Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M, one of the things that Aggies would talk about all the time is he keeps talking about executing. He keeps talking about executing. And was this offense overcomplicated? Was there always something that had to be a little bit extra with an outdated offense that Fisher would always implement with guys like Mond and the quarterbacks that would follow him? Yes, of course. But the truth is if they were able to execute at a high level, the offense would work. And when you hear a coach say execute, he's not lying. Now, you could say it's overcomplicated. You could say you have gripes on why the process is the way that it is, but he's not wrong. And Curt Cignetti's not wrong either. If his team just executes, you're going to get results like this, and they rolled the tide. To flip to the losing team, the Alabama Crimson Tide. Was this a successful 2025 season? You made it to the college football playoff, though with some controversy. That's back-to-back seasons where you've been at the at-large spot, really within the media headlines on whether or not you should have made the playoff. You lose to Florida State, but you also won against Georgia in Athens. You made it to the SEC championship. I would deem this as an improvement, but I wouldn't deem it as a success. And maybe if the litmus is improvement, or if the goalpost is improvement for you as an Alabama fan, then it's a successful year. But to me, this is not a successful year for Alabama. And I'm not trying to hold them to Nick Saban standards. The consistency has to be better for Alabama. It has to be better. You cannot deal with the volatility in the one-dimensional offense like you've had to deal with over the past couple of years. It can't be like that. You brought in Ryan Grubb. He cannot call a rushing attack to save his life. You're speaking to a Seattle Seahawks fan that had to watch his offense in live time not be able to run any semblance of a consistent rushing attack. He goes back to college. He can't do it. It is a passing offense only. And you have to be more dynamic. Or if you allow yourself to be opened up to, hey, I'm a defense and I can prep for the fact that you're not even going to try to run the ball, you're dead on arrival. You're dead on arrival. This team is not going to win any championships if they're not going to find a way to be more dynamic. So I want to hear from you. Was this a successful season for Alabama? And we may have to dive on that in a later show. All right. Last game. I appreciate anyone who's watching today's show. And this one will be surprisingly quick as I'm pulling up some of the statistics. Mainly because I am curious on one stat real quick. All right. There we go. The Ole Miss Rebels knock off the Georgia Bulldogs in the All-State Sugar Bowl What a game. What a story. Oh my gosh. I cannot express to you how happy it makes me to watch Ole Miss win this game and find themselves a game away from the national championship while Lane Kiffin is sitting on the sidelines of not this team. He's sitting on the couch. He's sitting in the stands. He's sitting in the press box, but he's not calling plays. He's not coaching this team. And this team, truly, when we talked about it in the preview prediction, there's two paths. Now, obviously, they could still win this game in the other way that we're going to talk about, but well, actually, I really don't know. This Ole Miss team had two options. They could have let all the noise get to the best of them. This is dating even back into the regular season. Or they could have banded together and start playing their best football. And we are clearly seeing them play their best brand. This defense flies to the football. Did they give up 34 points? You damn right they did. But they made enough plays. They got to Gunnar Stockton enough times. And when they hit him, it was hard. It was fast. My gracious, someone check on Gunnar Stockton, because that brain was, I was going to say something out of pocket. That brain was fried. I mean, he was popped. He was getting hit like he was Tim Tebow, and he is not the size of Tim Tebow. But the true takeaway I have from this game, to really kick it off, is Trinidad Chambliss. The reason why we said that he was the biggest X factor in the entire college football playoff is because he has a Steph Curry-like effect. When he's on, there's not many players on the face of the earth that can play at his level. And this is a great example of it. When Trinidad Chambliss is playing at 30 for 46, 362, 2 touchdowns, and this was not just looking at the box score. If you go put on the tape, it is incredible throw after incredible throw, layering over the middle, a fade shot to go win the game, being able to create, extend. Kirby Smart trying to get to him. It didn't matter because he continued to make play after play after play. We could also speak for Kawan Lacey, 22 of 98, 2 touchdowns, 4.5 yards per carry. When you have two of the best players, I would say the two best players on the football field, sometimes it doesn't matter. You could be the 96 Bulls. You could be the 2017 Warriors. It does not matter. Because Trinidad Chambliss and Kawan Lacey were playing the games of their lives. Statistically, it may not show it. I promise you, if you watch this game, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And this is why I said he was the biggest X factor in the entire college football playoff. Because when he's on one, I don't think Indiana's stopping him. I don't think Oregon's going to stop him. And I don't know if Miami's going to stop him. And the matchup already that is going to be so good, and it's going to be talked about so much, is how is Miami with Mesidor and Bain going to contain a guy like Chambliss? Because what you're going to see is 4 carries for 14 yards and say, oh, Chambliss must have been just cooking in the pocket. Nah. That's not what we're talking about. Trinidad Chambliss was creating, he was extending, he was making so many plays and then throwing the football downfield. It was remarkable. This game was an all-time classic, in my opinion. This game was incredible. Georgia ties it up late after being down double digits, and it felt like you did not cut off the head of the snake. You were not able to finish the job against Georgia, and you get a goal line stand, which frankly, I wrote down that was the make or break moment of this game. I really do not know if Ole Miss was going to score a touchdown, but I felt so much more confident about them getting into field goal range, especially with how good that kicker was. The unsung hero is the kicking units in these college football playoffs. He was hitting what felt like could be 70-yard kicks. He was 3 for 3 with a long of 56. I mean, remarkable from a kicking unit when we've seen horrid kicking units the entire college football playoff. But that goal line stand wasn't one where it's a 4th and goal, 1-yard line. You have to get it in, and you don't. It was just sound football when you needed it. It was bend, don't break. And this was one of the rare times that I felt like I've seen Kirby Smart panic. You know, I had Georgia winning the national championship. I had Georgia as a team that I put my hard-earned currency to win it because I felt like when you give the best coach in college football time to exploit teams, and every single team in the college football playoff had an area to be exploited, I thought this was a perfect matchup for Kirby Smart to get another redemption against an Ole Miss team with a great offense that got the best out of Kirby. And then the second time around, they got the best of Kirby again. That's remarkable. And that's without Lane Kiffin. You, of course, still have Charlie Weiss and the majority of that staff in this playoff run. But wow, just a remarkable win. And Georgia, once again, as we've been doing for all these other games, Georgia, this is not a successful season, I think, for their standards, because I think Kirby Smart, it's national championship. And as we get further and further away from that back-to-back seasons, you start to get a little worried. We're looking at, I would say, worried in the lightest way. There's no panic meter. I would say worried scale, maybe like a 3. But like, you are now back-to-back seasons where you win the SEC and you can't win a game in the 12-team playoff. Makes you wonder. Makes you wonder a little bit of what can we do to elevate to the next level, because clearly the talent rosters aren't at the same level of 2022 and 2023. And what can Kirby do to elevate this team to not only win the SEC, because that seems to be like the easiest thing that they can do, but not only do that, but elevate themselves to be ready for the college football playoff? Could it be to just not have a bye week? We'll talk about it in another show, but what a win from Ole Miss, and what a win for Trinidad Chambliss, who I would argue right there with Ruben Bain is the MVP of the college football playoff. I don't think they give out that award, but we'll give one out to Trinidad Chambliss as the early favorite. Odds are saying, I'm hearing that right in my ear, -110. No, -175. -175 for Trinidad Chambliss to be the MVP of the college football playoff. We have 2 subjects left. And Chris, the last one's going to be relatively quick. I don't want to have this conversation. I don't want to talk about this. As you see me wearing a Tennessee sweatshirt and an A&M hat and an A&M pennant behind me. Listen, I still love other conferences. But as we close the chapter on bowl season, and Wake Forest beats Mississippi State, we need to have a conversation about the SEC. Now, if this is the first time you're seeing this mustache, this Reveille hat, the Tennessee sweatshirt, if this is the first time you're watching the Stadium Pulse, I have been on here many of times saying that the SEC is the best conference of college football. I wouldn't classify myself as an ESPN shill. I wouldn't classify myself as someone that capes for the SEC for my own benefit. I mean, Crutchman Media and this company and this show is completely powered through our own thoughts and brains. We don't have the motivation or agendas or reasoning to back the SEC. It is just my fundamental belief that the SEC from top to bottom provides a talent roster that is very challenging from a week-to-week basis. Now, has that changed over the past couple of years? Probably since 2020, where the Big Ten has definitely stepped up to be at eye level with the SEC as a complete conference? Absolutely. But the noise around the SEC has gone louder, because not only do you have Greg Sankey, who continues to push agendas for his own conference, which I will just say, everyone does it. Everyone does it for their own conference, but it's the fact that it's the SEC and it's Greg Sankey who says that there should be 7 teams in the college football playoff. I don't agree with that by any means. But the SEC goes 2-7 against non-SEC teams in bowl games. For the overall 2025 season, they were 13 of 13, or 13-13 against Power 4 competition. Perfectly mediocre. And there's a lot of talk around the overhyped SEC. Now, my true opinion on this is the Big Ten and the SEC are clearly in their own bubble. in terms of the Power Four. And then you have a small gap, and it's the ACC and the Big 12. And then you have a big gap, and then it's the Group of Five. That is not to say the Group of Five can never play in the Power Four. That is not to say an ACC team can't get placed into the SEC and compete. That's not what I'm trying to say. But these overall conferences, I think you have a sizable jump between those gaps I was talking about. And truly, for me, what I feel when talking about this is a lot of people will point to, oh, well, now you could pay players. That's why the Big Ten is better. I would actually make the argument, if you were to say the Big Ten is the best conference in college football, it's about the development. I feel like the development of players has scaled a ton for the Big Ten, and the retaining of high-level prospects has been much better with the Big Ten. When we look at the SEC in the 2000s and the 2010s, and there wasn't the volatility of the portal, as much as people want to say it was about paying players, I think it was frankly for the fact that they were staying there and being developed at a very high level. So you would get these talent rosters that were incredibly good, incredibly dynamic. It was remarkable that we would see a Clemson scale up in the ACC to have the talent rosters at that same level. And no one's going to say Clemson was paying guys. And if you want to say that's what makes it so remarkable is that they weren't, sure. But like, I really believe if you are going to knock the SEC, I think the development has taken a step back. And I think it's also much more difficult in 2025 and beyond to really scale and see how good a team truly is. When it was East versus West, now I'm not a fan of divisions, but when you have grown these conferences to the size that they're at, with the Big Ten at 18, and I believe the SEC is at 14, or I believe 16, that you take away the conferences and you get a Texas A&M who played 90% of the bottom feeders within the SEC and one good team in the SEC at the very top with Texas, you don't really get a good sense of who's good and who's not. And then the game becomes within most of the college football public, and this could be even said outside of these conferences, is who's fraudulent, who's the most fraudulent team. Look at who have they played. They haven't played anybody good. It's a scheduling problem. And so I think you run into this problem. I keep saying problem. You run into this issue where everyone is trying to find out who's fraudulent. And we get to the college football playoff, and as soon as they lose a game, or as soon as they lose a bowl game, oh, we knew exactly who they were. They were not a good team. Now, will I say the Big Ten probably over the past couple of years has been better than the SEC? I think so. But if you were to ask me, does that mean that I will say that the SEC is a worse conference than the Big Ten just because of a couple of years? No. I still think from top to bottom, you have a higher skill level in a more complete conference from the SEC than the Big Ten. And I think the Big Ten is so close to being a consistently better conference than the SEC. If that tier 2 and that tier 3 elevate their talent level and their skill level from a week to week basis, because we see with like a Ohio State schedule, it was very light. It was a very light schedule. That is not to say the tier 2s can't beat the tier 2s of the SEC, because we just watched in some bowl games. Illinois beat Tennessee. There's plenty of other examples of them getting wins over the SEC. I'm not saying there's a mile gap. Frankly, what I'm saying, it's eye level, and I'm not going to be that mad if you say the Big Ten is better. Just have good reasons for it. Because if you're going to tell me, oh, it's because we could pay players now, oh, it's because we're winning national championships, that's not what dictates a good overall conference. Explain to me why the overall conference is better. If you want to say one is better at development and retaining talent, I'm not going to be mad at you if you say it's the Big Ten. All right, we got to do portal updates, and we got to get out of here. And yeah, Chris, this may be a little bit quick. So we have a lot of like bullet points. The transfer portal opened up January 2nd, 2026. There's so much news to talk about. Frankly, as I'm recording this, my phone is the camera right now. There's probably news that is being sent out to the world around the transfer portal. So I can't hit on everything, but if you want to hear my thoughts on something, type it. Let me know in the comments because we will talk about it. I see every single comment. So do not worry. Drew Messamaker, North Texas quarterback. Funny story about Messamaker. Did not play a lick of high school football. Is one of the best transfer portal quarterbacks. He is an elite talent. Was rumored to potentially go to Indiana. He got crystal balled. And if you don't know what crystal ball means in the recruiting space, I understand not a lot of people follow recruiting anymore. It's just an expert's pick or prediction. It is basically them stamping their name to a prediction and saying, I think this is going to happen. So don't believe every single crystal ball you see, but there are certain people within the industry that I will value whenever they put a crystal ball. I think Steve Whitfong is a perfect example of that. They call them Fong bombs. Don't look at me. I didn't think of the name. He is rumored to go to Oklahoma State. That shouldn't come too much of a surprise. North Texas head coach, Coach Morris, goes to Oklahoma State, and he seems to be grabbing as many of his players from North Texas, bringing his luggage. It's going to be Louis Vuitton, and Messamaker is a damn good quarterback, and he's just so fitting for how much he could produce throwing the football. It's like the same thing we talked about with like Wisconsin, going back to your roots. When you think of Oklahoma State, you think of air raid, and Messamaker and that air raid with Eric Morris is just going to be perfection. I cannot wait to see it. It's something that he could go to Indiana, and I think he would do great at Indiana following Fernando Mendoza. But I want to see Oklahoma State play some damn good football. So very excited to see that. We have some updates around Cam Coleman. Sounds like his visit list. Now, this may not be in order. I know the first two are in order. He's going to be visiting Texas for 2 days. Then Texas A&M, Texas Tech, USC, and Alabama. This is the number one player in the portal, and for good reason. We talked about on the last show. This is a guy that I think is going to make an overall offense just so much better. He's the closest thing, I think, in terms of talent, not actual production, to like a Julio Jones. If he leaves the Texas campus, doesn't mean that he's not going to go to Texas, but it definitely bodes very well, especially knowing that they're going to have 2 days of having Cam Coleman on campus. Right now, if I were to make a prediction, I would think Texas. I think Arch Manning, and if they can get the right number in terms of NIL, I think there's a sense of urgency with Texas that we'll talk about, where I think they very much are going to put all their chips into 2026, because if they look back on the Arch Manning era with no college football playoff appearances or not even a sniff of a national championship, there's going to be some uncomfortable conversations with Steve Sarkisian. Isaac Brown, running back out of Louisville, I would say is a top 3 player in this upcoming class. Very dynamic athlete, very good running back. I think he's going to land at Texas. You should probably get that news relatively shortly. I think they originally were going to go try to get a Jaden Ball. They got the running backs coach from Florida. There was a lot of smoke around that. Sounds like Jaden Ball may end up agreeing to a deal to stay at Florida. Now, nothing has been reported yet, but that could also be a good sign if you're a Florida fan. And it seems like Texas has shifted their focus to Isaac Brown, waiting for confirmation around Jaden Ball. If Ball stays at Florida, expect Isaac Brown news to follow shortly. If Ball just somehow hops into the portal, expect him to be the favorite to go to Texas and Isaac Brown to potentially look elsewhere. Austin Romaine, a linebacker out of Kansas State, has already been crystal balled to go to Texas Tech. This is a very good linebacker, a down year overall for Kansas State, and they expect this for Texas Tech overall. I wrote this down solely from the fact of you're going to see this for Texas Tech, a aggression to refill that defense. You're going to be losing, I believe, from Mello Height and David Bailey, a ton of those linebackers. You have to revamp this defense while also diving into the quarterback portal, because you need to uplift that quarterback room. And it sounds like Brendan Sorsby is going to be deciding between Texas Tech and LSU. He's currently in Lubbock. He may be going to LSU today. I think this is going to come down to truly the NIL number, and I think Texas Tech is not going to let Sorsby leave, and I think LSU may pivot elsewhere. I think a Lagway comes to mind. I think Sam Levitt is one that could very much land at LSU. LSU has definitely surged for Sorsby, but if I'm Sorsby and I want to play at the highest level, I'm going to LSU. The last guy we'll name is Jalen Mbakwe, an athlete, corner/wide receiver, dynamic athlete. Very curious on where he goes. He was a guy that was not expected to go into the portal from Alabama, but I am going to keep that noted just solely from the fact of I'm very curious on where he goes. I followed his recruitment. I think he could be a very good athlete. It's just a jack of all trades, master of none situation for Mbakwe. But that is all the portal updates. If you want to hear from a specific name, let me know down in the comments and I'll let you know. But that'll do it, folks. Sorry, I'm reading a comment. I appreciate everyone for staying and watching the show today. We're going to wrap up here and I will see you guys. I think Tuesday is when we're going to run another show talking about the semifinals and all the transfer portal news. If we get any crazy updates, I may throw in another show. So the only way that you can know a show is happening is clicking subscribe, and that little bell will let you know when we go live. So I appreciate every single one of you guys for staying in and watching today's show. I'll see you guys next time.